I run this country.
I'm not just a servant to its economy, distracted by memes and reality shows, but an active problem solver.
I am more educated, diverse, and digitally fluent than any other generation before me.
I am the most capable of making an impact.
Political mudslinging and personal agendas have no place in my country.
I expect well-formed policy and accountability.
Being elected means you work for me.
I put you there, and I build the laws that govern my land.
I am the future of democracy. I am Youth Vote.
When I cast my ballot, consider it a well-informed vote for what I believe in.
Good evening, my name is Joshua Pack and I'm a senior at Polaris K-12. On behalf of the Anchorage Youth Vote Planning Team and the League of Women Voters of Anchorage, I would like to welcome you to our 2024 Youth Vote Candidate Forum. Whether you're here with us at the Wendy Williamson Auditorium, in the classroom, or at home, we're excited to share our program with you tonight. Anchorage Youth Vote is a program for local youth by local youth, and all aspects of tonight's program have been driven by core members of Anchorage Youth Vote's planning team, a group of 11 youth across Anchorage.
My name is Grace Colleen, and I'm a senior at Diamond High School. The chief goals of Youth Vote are to engage our peers in the democratic process, instill a lifelong dedication to voting and civic engagement, and to inspire future leaders through events that educate and empower. The goal of tonight's candidate forum is to introduce local youth to the democratic process by bringing the candidates front and center to answer peer-generated questions on topics that are relevant to the daily lives of Anchorage youth. We enjoyed working on this project and hope that it inspires our peers to become civically engaged and to vote when their time comes. Tonight's forum will focus on candidates for the Alaska seat in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Hi, my name is Rhiannon Adkins, and I am a senior at Stellar Secondary School. Tonight, 3 of the 4 leading candidates for Alaska's sole seat in the U.S. House of Representatives have been invited to submit opening and closing statements, as well as up to 1-minute responses to 12 total questions generated by Youth Vote members. Candidate responses will be shared in rotating order, beginning with Representative Mary Peltola, followed by Mr. Nick Begich, followed by Mr. John Wayne Howe. The 4th candidate, Mr. Eric Hafner, could not be reached in time for invitation.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Our young people are quite literally the future of our state. I understand the urgent need to invest in our housing, in new jobs, in education, and in all the fundamentals we need for a thriving economy. I want an Alaska where young people want to stay and raise their families, where they can see their children grow up. Everything I've done while in office is built around that goal.
Nick Begich here, candidate for Congress. I'm coming to you today to talk about our campaign, some of the issues that are relevant to Alaska's youth, and some of the solutions that we've got for those issues. Look, it's tough being a young person today. Interest rates are through the roof. It's hard to get started in that first job. Education's never been more expensive, and I understand these challenges. I've been there, I get it. We've got to make it easier for people to get started in their careers, save for a down payment for a home, and ensure that they believe and that they know that Alaska will provide the opportunities that people need in order to build a family and build a life in our state. I want to provide that for you. I look forward to answering these questions, and I thank you for being an engaged member of our community.
I'm John Wayne Howe. I am running for U.S. House of Representatives to represent the great nation state of Alaska. Alaska has the possibility to restart liberty and freedom of individuals from a basis that's stronger and better than has ever been done in the world. This basis comes from the knowledge of the Bill of Rights that's on the Constitution and the things that we have dreamed about in the last 100 years in America, but not been able to achieve because of the overextended taxation.
Now we begin our candidate forum. Our first question is, noting the concerning rates of suicides, depressions, and other mental health related issues, what will you do as our House representative to provide and increase access to mental health resources and treatments to Alaskans who need them, especially in rural Alaska, as well as those in younger age groups.
I am sorry to say that a lot of what is focused on for suicide prevention, the suicides come out of nowhere. People don't realize it. No one ever realized how suicidal I was as a teen. I came really close many times to crashing my car into a brick wall on the freeway because I wanted to kill myself. But I never told anybody that until now even. The thing we can do is we can make the society better. That's the biggest thing we can do. We can have a stable currency so people aren't afraid of things crashing. We can have freedom. You can have the possibility of being not just an Alaskan housed here on 1% of the ground, but you could go out and have your own place to live that you could build out of what's in the ground. The resources are here.
It's so important that we destigmatize seeking help for mental health challenges. Look, we all go through these moments in life where we have depression, anxiety, and some of us suffer from that more than others. We've got to make sure that people can seek the help that they need and that that help is available to people. We've got to do more to expand mental health treatment and access, not just in Alaska's cities, but also in Alaska's rural communities. And that starts with making providers more accessible, making sure that people have telemedicine options, and it's really about expanding those alternatives to Alaskans.
One of the things that I'm most proud of is bringing millions of dollars back to the state for telehealth and the investments in rural broadband that make access to telehealth throughout every part of our state more possible. I've co-sponsored the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act of 2022 to deliver more funding for mental health services and community wellness programs. I'm also a strong advocate of expanding Medicare drug price negotiation power to cover everyone and span the entire spectrum of medication.
According to the Alaska Beacon, in 2023, 40,000 people moved out of Alaska, with a significant portion of that being young Alaskans who attended college out of the state that do not intend to return. In fact, outmigration has been occurring since 2010. At the federal level, what policies will you support and advocate for in order to help incentivize young Alaskans to stay in the state and contribute to our economy after they graduate?
You know, I love this question. It's such an important question. It's something we dealt with in the opening remarks. Look, people need to know that they have a future in Alaska. And part of knowing that you have a future in Alaska is knowing that you can get a job here. When you're done with school, if you've chosen to go to school outside of the state, it's important that we provide opportunities for our young people to come back, not just to have that first job, but to have a career arc that's possible within Alaska. Something that you can reach for and achieve, that you can bank on, right, and have confidence in. And we're a resource state, so understanding that we are keeping our state open, have the ability to develop the resources that we do have responsibly, that creates a number of opportunities, not just in those industries, but in all the complementary industries that surround it. I want to make sure that we keep the state open, and any policy that we can pass in the Congress that will keep Alaska open and thriving is something I'm going to support.
The key to resolving the outmigration crisis is to create opportunities for young people within our state. That means bringing good-paying jobs and the opportunity to receive training and skills development for those jobs to our state. From aviation to tourism to manufacturing, I've supported legislation to increase access to job training for in-demand jobs. I've brought over $8.7 billion to the state to address critical infrastructure needs that have historically been barriers to investment and job creation. I've also secured more funding to our university system to make sure that Alaskans can access a world-class education in their home state.
Make things to do here. Open up more ground. RS-2477s, as I keep saying lots of times, that's a right-of-way across Alaska. Those were granted by the federal government to the state so that we can get to places and do things. As far as the numbers of people moving out of state, it's the Alaskans, the ones that want to stay here. That's what we got to concern ourselves with. There's always going to be people moving away, people moving in. The government a lot of times focuses on these numbers more because they just want dollars. They want to have more people to tax and oppress. But you and me that want to stay here, the freedoms, the rights, an Alaska that is what we want it to be. That's what will keep people here.
According to Alaska Public Media, last year was Alaska's deadliest on record for opioid overdoses. And according to the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, Alaska teens are 25.67% more likely to have used drugs in the past month than the average American teen. With this in mind, what policies will you advocate for in Congress to prevent drug overdoses, keep dangerous substance away from our towns, and rehabilitate Alaskans who are struggling with substance abuse disorders?
I have been a leading voice in the fight against fentanyl and the addiction crisis plaguing our state. I co-sponsored Bruce's Law to raise awareness on the lethality of fentanyl and fentanyl-contaminated drugs, and provide funding to local communities to rehabilitate struggling Alaskans. I've also supported legislation to crack down on the arrival of fentanyl and fentanyl-contaminant drugs into our state in the first place to help safeguard our communities.
Substance abuse is something everybody has to fight privately, but there's also the public issue. The opioids and drugs that are available should be clean, proper drugs, just like you would get in a pharmaceutical situation. They should be available where you can buy them over the counter. I know lots of people that have been on OxyContin prescribed by doctors, high doses. They have managed it up and down on their own and got through it. But they didn't get stuck with this evil fentanyl, which blocking it from coming into the country doesn't make the difference. It's the fact that there is not a competing good drug that you can readily obtain so that you can have your possibility of pain relief or even psychological needs that you decide what you're going to have and not have.
This is a multifaceted question, and there's a lot of components to it. Number one, we've got to close the border. We've got to stop the flow of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs coming into our country from other nations. That's number one. Number two, we've got to make sure that addiction treatment is available to people who have become addicted to these substances. If we don't give people an off-ramp and give them an on-ramp back on to a sober life, it's going to be very difficult for us to turn this state around. We see the results of this throughout Anchorage and around the state of Alaska when we encounter so many in the homeless population that are struggling with addiction. We don't want that future for our young people. We have to do better at ensuring that the flow of drugs is restricted and that people have the ability to come off of drugs when they've succumbed to addiction.
With differing policies surrounding women's health, including the veto of birth control coverage in Alaska and the Dobbs decision, how do you plan to approach creating an adequate, equal care surrounding women's health?
The Roe versus Wade decision was basically stupid. The Dobbs decision is a little bit better as far as that goes, as far as a Supreme Court decision. I don't really believe that we should have 9 permanently appointed or 12 or however many we want to have people that are making the final decisions for people's lives. The court is out of control. As far as the basic issue of ripping a child out of a person's womb, that hurts me. But I also have had family members and friends that have paid to have that done. It's a hard decision. It's a hard situation. And I think that we take it too lightly. I think that even though it's very hard to say, I think we need to start calling it what it really is, which is child murder. And we need to have an honest discussion about it.
You know, it's so important that we ensure women have access to the proper care that they need. As we're talking about starting families, as we're talking about having families, we want to make sure that that happens at the appropriate time, that you're in a position in life where you can afford to have that family, to provide for that family. That's important to me. I think that the basis of our future as a state is ensuring that Alaskans stay here, that there's opportunities here, and that those opportunities extend to families as they're developed.
Alaskans are pro-choice because we value our right to privacy and to make healthcare choices that affect ourselves and our families. Lower 48 extremists want to pass a national abortion ban without exceptions. However, in Congress, I'll always stand up and protect our basic freedoms. I'm a co-sponsor of the Women's Health Protection Act, which will codify Roe. And I've repeatedly voted against extremist attempts to strip military families of their privacy rights. I also oppose the Hyde Amendment and believe people should be able to access the care they need regardless of income.
Climate change is drastically affecting our ecosystems, evidenced by lessening salmon counts, melting permafrost, and coastal erosion. How do you plan to approach fossil fuel consumption on its effects on climate and our ecosystems?
We hear so often about climate change and fossil fuels, but oftentimes we have to ask the real question. Is the left serious about this so-called energy transition? Alaska has the opportunity to provide traditional energy and this new alternative energy in the form of minerals, in the form of oil and gas. And yet the Biden administration continues to shut down the world's most responsible jurisdiction for developing both. My goal for Alaska is to open up the true potential of our state, not just for the benefit of this generation, but for generations to come. I believe that doing this work needs to be done in the most responsible jurisdiction possible. That's Alaska.
Our resource economy is driven by demand in the lower 48 and beyond. Alaska does resource development better than anywhere else, so as long as other states and countries rely on fossil fuels, it should come from Alaska. Alaskans mostly want affordable and reliable energy and are happy to tap into all of our resources so we can afford to power our homes and get to work. We need an approach to energy that includes all of the above, allows us all to achieve full energy independence, and is sustainable for the long term. Investments in renewables create more job opportunities and lower energy prices and are vital in ensuring we can achieve long-term energy security well into the future. Alaska has the largest renewable energy potential in the entire country. I brought home over $400 million to invest in that potential and create thousands of good-paying jobs. With these investments, 75% of Alaskans will be on 80% renewable energy by 2040, lowering emissions and energy prices for regular Alaskans.
Coastal erosion is a problem. Coastal erosion has always been a problem. The normal solution is people move, or people don't build as permanent structures right next to the edge of the river, the ocean, whatever. We've become a society that builds too close to the water anymore. We cause ourselves problems. We imagine that we cause ourselves problems with CO2, even though it's only 0.04 of 1% in the air. And in times past, it's been much higher than that, and we've had more plant growth, which is what people eat. A lot of this is just people trying to get grant money, and I can't change their stupidity.
How do you feel about the U.S.'s current involvement in foreign wars, and what policies would you support in order to promote global peace?
Our number one priority in government should be safeguarding and investing in the well-being of the American people. My job is to defend Alaskans, and I believe that issues that affect our daily lives should be our number one priority. We should limit military intervention only to cases where our national security is under direct risk.
We'd have to be a little cautious as we bring everybody home and shut down all of the foreign bases. I am an unabashed peacemonger. I am peace. Bring people home. We can have the jet planes, we can have the tanks, we can have all those things, and we can have good fun playing with them right here at home. You know, we got enough border, enough area. We don't need to go to other people's backyards and tear it up, and they might not want us there.
Let's start with some key numbers. $35 trillion in debt. Deficits of $1 to $2 trillion a year. The Social Security program under duress because people in D.C. can't seem to get their spending habits under control. We have domestic challenges that need to be resolved. And engaging in one more foreign conflict is not going to help us solve those challenges. We've got to make sure that we are focusing on the future of Americans, prioritizing Americans first. And I don't think we do that when we engage in foreign conflicts. We need to be peace brokers. That should be the new role in the 21st century for America. Peace seekers, peace brokers. We need to go out and make sure that the weapons of war are used for national defense purposes only and focus on domestic issues so we can get our house in order for this generation and for those generations yet to come.
Many rural communities in Alaska still lack reliable internet access and adequate community infrastructure. How will you prioritize broadband access and infrastructure improvements to help ensure that young people and their communities across the state can thrive?
There's two things on that. The one is satellite internet is moving a lot quicker than what it was at first, so it may not be the most cost-effective to be putting in fiber optic cables as was being done, started 20 years ago here. The other thing with this is if we go to the state actually funding the mandatory minimum schooling like they're supposed to, the state may need to put this in so that they meet that requirement, because there's a lot of places where you can't even have one or two teachers to teach kids children how to read and write.
One of the things that we've seen in the aftermath of this recent hurricane is that FEMA chose to cancel an award to Starlink. Starlink had the opportunity to prevent so many needless tragedies in North Carolina. And it's being rolled out now, and it's saving people's lives, and it's getting them reconnected to their families and to the resources that they need in order to recover from that terrible tragedy. But the federal government has chosen to deprioritize satellite internet as a source of broadband. I think that's a huge mistake. And it's particularly a mistake in Alaska, where we know that wiring up some of these smaller rural communities is quite the challenge, not just initially in terms of initial investment, but long-term, how do we maintain those networks? Satellite is a fantastic technology. We need to be investing in that in Alaska. People are doing it, the private sector is doing it without the help of the government. But if we're going to be ensuring that broadband access is available to everyone, I think satellite in our state, very important.
I have brought back billions of dollars in investments for rural broadband access across our state. It's been one of my priorities since I was elected. I even supported legislation to make it more affordable to develop broadband projects.
Energy costs continue to rise around the state of Alaska, and the effects are disproportionately felt by rural communities. What do you plan to do to combat this trend?
Energy costs are rising. Now, in order to address that, we got to recognize, where does our energy come from? Well, it's coming from traditional sources of energy like natural gas, coal, and other forms of fossil fuels. When we restrict the ability to produce those resources, the costs are going to rise. And we've seen that here in South Central Alaska, we've seen it in Fairbanks, we've seen it in rural communities. There are a number of technologies that can be brought to bear, however, that will help to address this. Small nuclear is something that's being talked about throughout rural Alaska as a real viable alternative to create stable base power and to ensure that the cost of energy remains relatively low compared to where it is right now. In some communities, you've got to fly diesel in for diesel generation of power. That's a problem. We also need to invest more in hydro. Alaska has some of the best hydro potential in the nation, and our grid relies on it both in Southeast Alaska and on the rail belt. But to the extent that we can, additional investments in hydro will drive the cost of energy for Alaska residents down.
Like every modern economy, Alaska's biggest need is affordable and reliable energy. However, unlike many other states, Alaska can be self-reliant and achieve energy independence. The rail belt energy grid is critical in addressing this need, and the senators and I secured hundreds of millions of dollars to revitalize our energy grid and bring good-paying jobs to the state. A revitalized rail belt energy grid can tap into our state's energy potential and help Alaska become more energy independent.
This is one of the big ones as a U.S. House. Probably won't be perceived very well in the lower 48, but we were originally guaranteed 90% of the royalties from anything that's on the U.S. soil, anything that's on federal ground. We have only been getting 50%. That was one of those things that our previous U.S. House person in there years ago signed away those rights so that we could get the pipeline built. They would have built the pipeline anyway. We didn't have to drop down to 50% anyway. When we get that 90%, all of that money needs to come back home and make the oil less expensive for everybody, the state around, Also, the current oil that we're taking out needs to be for Alaska first. If we don't have it here to use, what's the point?
School shootings are an ongoing tragedy across the country, with no single easy solution. With Alaska's high rates of gun ownership and national ranking as the 41st state for gun safety laws, what measures would you take to help ensure the safety of our schools and youth-serving communities? How do you protect both the Second Amendment as well as our students and community?
As an owner of 176 long guns and a strident defender of our Second Amendment, I believe strongly that responsible gun ownership necessarily means taking personal accountability in securing our weapons and making sure that everyone in our households have adequate training and understanding about the best practices for gun ownership. I've also sponsored legislation and delivered investment in mental health programs to help those at risk of perpetrating violent behavior.
The Second Amendment is not currently protected by the government. They've violated it many times, for starters. As far as the schools go, public schools are the #1 common denominator in school shootings. It's not the guns, it's the school. They come in and people are planning to use bombs, all kinds of things. And when you look at this, it's almost always somebody that came from the school that they were going to blow up, shoot up, do harm to. We need to make our schools more of a learning experience and less of a 12-year jail sentence.
It's so important that we teach gun safety at an early age. I've had the opportunity to interact with a number of junior shotgun leagues in the state as I've traveled throughout Alaska, and I think these programs are really important programs because they teach gun safety and responsible firearm ownership and use. Look, the Second Amendment is here, and we need the Second Amendment. It's an important right that we have as Americans to have the ability to bear arms. But the truth of the matter is we've got to make sure that's done responsibly. And early education is very important. I'm a strong supporter of it, and I'm a strong supporter of funding that education. What we saw under the Biden-Harris administration was actually an attempt to cut school funding for any school that provided that sort of education. That's wrong, can't happen, won't happen on my watch.
American politics continues to become more polarized with every election cycle. What kind of leadership will you bring to D.C. to bridge the seemingly widening gap in American politics? Following the last question, how will you use your promotion to promote civil discourse?
You know, honesty is such an important component of civil discourse. We have to make sure that when we're talking to the other side that we're being truthful and direct. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of that recently in American politics, but that's something that I hope to provide should you elect me as your next representative. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're all people. We're trying to find the right solution to today's challenges. We can't vilify the other side. Talking about issues is important, absolutely. But when things become personal or dishonest, that's where we've crossed a line. That needs to stop. We need to be able to have civil discourse and remember that we're all in it together.
Embracing the Alaska model is a good start. Back when Ted Stevens and Don Young brought home historic investments into our state, D.C. was much less partisan. Democrats and Republicans socialized with each other, they shared meals, their kids played with each other. Anyone who's done time in Juneau can relate. But D.C. hasn't been this way in a long time. I'm proud that our Alaska delegation doesn't let lower 48 partisanship get to us. We can continue to do things the Alaska way. We don't agree on every issue, but we don't let our disagreements stop us from working together to get things done for Alaska.
By talking instead of fighting, that's pretty obvious. I think one of the people running for House right now talked about how they wanted to be like Don Young and grab people in the hall and assault them. I think that's a little crazy. But no, the discourse, we actually don't have that much difference between the Democrats and Republicans. That's the problem. They're both doing the same thing to try and oppress the rights of the individual. My focus is on the rights of the individual. And as far as a chasm between me and the other people, there's going to be a bigger chasm because I'm Alaskan. That's just the way it is.
In 2023, the cost of living in Alaska was nearly 5% higher than the national average. Cost of living is ever increasing and consistently outpaces wage growth, not just in Alaska, but around the country. Young people are greatly affected by this disparity. What will you do to improve the financial future for Gen Z and younger generations while securing financial stability for all communities?
As a mother of 7, I know how hard it is for young people to make ends meet, pay for their energy bills, and the incredible barriers to homeownership that young people face. These issues are at core to my agenda of delivering for the day-to-day needs of every person.
We need to have the ability, and that's one of the things in the U.S. House I really want to work on, is getting it to where it's legal for private banks to hold silver, gold, platinum, copper, anything, and actually in physical store in Alaska. None of this phony, you can equate it as far as trading it with some kind of a crypto device, but it has to have a physical basis. But these banks in competition have to be set up. The dollar now is so ruined, there is going to be a crash of the US dollar if we don't fix this. And the crash of the US dollar is what you're seeing by the increasing prices. It's just an indicator of what's yet to come. That's going to be the greatest disaster we could take advantage of if we have a good economy already set up in advance.
The cost of living has gotten out of control, and the truth of the matter is it's been caused by government overspending. When the government spends more money than it takes in, it has to finance that somehow. Well, what the government has chosen to do is to finance that through money printing. They've created more money to pay their bills. When they do that, the money supply goes up and the number of goods does not, and so you get inflation as the price equilibrium tries to adjust. Look, we also need to make sure that we're not bringing in more foreign workers into our nation. That's something one of my opponents in this race has proposed, to bring foreigners into Alaska to take entry-level jobs from youth. I'm opposed to that. I don't think that helps solve the problem of the high cost of living. I think we need to make sure that we keep jobs available for Alaskans, and we make sure that we get government under control in DC in order to keep the cost of living reasonable.
Now we'll hear our candidates' closing statements in the same order.
I'm John Wayne Howe. I am running for the United States House of Representatives for the great nation state of Alaska. I am also the chairman of the Alaskan Independence Party, and our number one platform is to provide independence for individual Alaskans through any peaceful and lawful means. I would like you to vote for me number 1 on the selection and then rank other people below that so that it gets counted. I'm not spending millions of dollars like the other candidates, so for the numbers to get counted, it has to be a number 1 vote. I'd really appreciate that so that at least it gets counted and people will see how many other people care about the freedom and independence of their fellow Alaskan. Thank you.
The state, this nation, this future belongs to you. It's so important that you get involved, all right? Because it is your future. And when you don't vote, if you don't, you're letting somebody else decide your future for you. At the end of the day, every generation has to stand up, has to take responsibility, and recognize that this is their world. And I value not just the vote of the youth, but the opinion of the youth, the perspective of the youth, and I want to make sure that you have the ability to start your life successfully. Nothing would be worse than my generation handing over a broken system to you. We can't let that happen. You've got to be a part of the solution as well, and I'm glad that you are part of the solution by participating in this forum.
I spend my time in Congress working on things we can do to improve the day-to-day lives of Alaskans. I've helped bring home $8.7 billion to address our critical infrastructure needs. Now we're expanding broadband across the state. We're revitalizing our railbelt energy grid to tap into our state's energy potential. We're expanding airports, road systems, ports, and ferries for Alaskans so every Alaskan has access to reliable transportation and our state can become a more attractive place to create jobs and invest in. With the Rail Belt revitalization effort, infrastructure expansion across the state, and job training opportunities, we are creating good paying jobs, so Alaskans have a reason to stay in Alaska, raise their families in Alaska, and watch their grandkids grow up in Alaska. I've supported legislation to lower drug costs, create tax credits for working people, invest in new housing construction, and similar policies to help address the daily challenges that every Alaskan, especially younger Alaskans, face.
Thank you to Representative Mary Peltola, Mr. Nick Begich, and Mr. John Wayne Howe for your time and for supporting youth engaged in the democratic process. Youth Vote would not be possible without the commitment of our planning team. Thank you all for your dedication and support to this project.
Thank you also to our community members for their continuing support of Anchorage Youth Vote. The Anchorage School District, Spirit of Youth, Alaska Youth Development Coalition, League of Women Voters in Anchorage, and Hollingsworth Design.
And finally, thank you to everyone for taking the time to watch our Candidates Forum, whether in the classroom, at home, or here with us tonight at the Wendy Williamson Auditorium. We hope that this forum helps inspire you to become more engaged in your community, because the power to shape our futures and change the world lies with us, today's youth. Students, please refer to your instructions from your teachers on how to cast your vote in our mock election. Have a great night.